Well, I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years.
Edmund Emil Kemper III, born December 18, 1948, is an American serial killer, rapist, cannibal, and necrophile who murdered 10 people, including his paternal grandparents and mother. He is noted for his large size, standing at 6 feet 9 inches, and for his high intellect, possessing an IQ of 145. Kemper was nicknamed the co-ed killer as most of his victims were female college students. Let's take a listen at his early interviews while being incarcerated.
Can you say how many people might be doing crimes like you were doing?
It would be a guess, but it's not. It's far more than 35. It isn't that impossible in this society. It happens.
Are there more people?
They didn't give up.
How many?
She didn't give up. I did. I came in out of the cold. And what I'm saying is there are some people who prefer it in the cold. But
Edmund was a middle child born to Clarnell and E. E. Kemper. He never saw a steady marriage between his parents and eventually witnessed their divorce. Initially, after the divorce, he went on to live with his dad and then went to live with his mother. His relationship with his mother was rather disturbing. She always degraded him and abused him physically and emotionally. At one point, she kept him away from herself and from his sisters and had him stay in the basement of her house as she feared that he would hurt them. Kemper repeatedly puts emphasis on the fact that his mother was the reason he turned out the way that he is.
I was also involved in killing co-eds because my mother was associated with college work, college co-eds, women, and had a very strong and violently outspoken position on men for much of my upbringing. My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure. I hate to distill it down into such, into one-word realities like that. There's a lot that leads into that happening, but that is what happened. They represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her. And I was not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her. And I was destroying it.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships. I knew absolutely nothing about that whole area.
Kemper played a gas chamber game with toy dolls. They belonged to his sisters. At age 10 and 13, he killed 2 pet cats. After several disturbing events that Kemper caused, his mother sent him away to live on a farm with his grandparents. There, he started to fantasize of the murders of his grandparents. They caught on to some of his behavior problems and kept rifles away. He ended up getting a hold of one and shot his grandma at home and grandpa outside when he arrived home. In Edmund's perception, he thought he was a saint and did a favor to his grandpa by shooting him outside so that he wouldn't have to find out his wife had been murdered. Upon committing his first 2 murders of his grandparents, he stated that he did it to see what it felt like. Upon being taken into custody for the murders of his grandparents, he underwent tests where it was determined that he was schizophrenic and had a higher than average IQ. He was placed in a mental institution, and though the doctor insisted that Kemper not be sent to live with his mother upon his release, he was still sent to live with her.
May 7th, 1972, Mary Ann Pesk and Anita Luchessa.
Edmund picked up Mary and Anita, 18, who were students at Fresno State University, hitchhiking, agreeing to take them to Stanford University. About an hour into driving, he was able to find a wooded area where he stabbed and strangled both of the girls. He put both of the bodies in the trunk and took them to his apartment where he photographed and raped both of the corpses. He then dismembered the bodies. When Edmund was driving back to his apartment with the girls' bodies in the trunk, he was pulled over by a police officer. The reason for his stop was a broken tail light, but the officer never discovered the bodies.
September 14th, 1972, Akio Ku.
Akiu, 15, missed her bus after dance and decided to hitchhike. When Edmund picked her up, he drove for a while before pulling a gun on her. He locked himself out of his car but manipulated her into letting him back in at gunpoint. He then choked her unconscious before he raped and killed her. Before taking Akiu back to his apartment like his other victims, he stopped by a bar and had a few drinks while her body was still in the trunk. After leaving the bar, he took her to his apartment where he would rape and dismember her body before he disposed of it.
January 8th, 1973, Cindy Shaw.
Edmund was driving on Cabrillo College's campus when he picked up Cindy, 18. He drove with her out to the woods and fatally shot her. He had just moved back in with his mother, so he took her corpse back to his mother's house and hid her in the closet. When his mother left for work the next morning, he proceeded to engage in the same activities as his other victims. Edmund kept Cindy's head for multiple days before disposing of it. Like his other victims, he engaged in erumatio regularly before burying her head in his mother's backyard.
February 5th, 1973, Rosaline Thorpe and Alice Liu.
After college-aged girls were warned about hitchhikers going missing, they were told to only accept rides from people with certain school stickers on their cars. Since Edmund's mother worked for one of the colleges, he had one of those stickers. Rosalind, 23, entered the car first but had to persuade Alice, 20, to come inside. Once the girls were both inside of the car, he shot and killed them both. He then proceeded to take their bodies back to his mother's house, but this time he decapitated them in the car before taking them inside. Once inside, he raped and finished dismembering the bodies.
April 20th, 1973, Clarnell Strandberg and Sarah Hawlett.
When Edmund went to visit his mother on April 20th, he waited for her to get home from going out after work. Since he had not seen her yet, he talked with her a while before going to bed. Around 5 a.m., he went into her room, struck her temple with a claw hammer, then decapitated her with a knife. After he beheaded her, he raped her. After he murdered and raped his mother, Edmund called Sarah, known as Sally Hallett, and convinced her to come over to his mother's house. When she arrived at the house, he decapitated her as well. When Edmund Kemper would dismember his victims, he would also retrieve the bullets in the bodies to make sure he could not be traced. He also claimed he beheaded the victims because their head was kind of like a trophy.
When Edmund Kemper was asked by a Cosmopolitan magazine reporter during a prison interview how he felt when he saw a pretty girl, he says, "When I see a pretty girl walking down the street, I think two things. One part wants to be real nice and sweet, and the other part wonders what her head would look like on a stick. Very chilling."
Edmund befriended the very police officers who were investigating his murders and would socialize with them at a bar called the Jury Room. They called him Big Ed and never suspected him. When he initially confessed to them, they thought he was pulling a prank.